All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at a truly wild situation today. A fascinating, honestly almost absurd case where the super rigid world of traditional law crashes head-on into the nonlinear reality of network physics. We're talking about the legal case of Dr. Chen Jing Yuan. He's a complex systems scientist who found himself caught in this massive disconnect between how the judicial system views the world and how science actually measures it. It's basically a story of what happens when human rules try to boss around mathematical constants. I mean, picture the real-world stakes here for a second. The prosecution is out here claiming that a simple click of a button, literally just one single social media forward, somehow brought down public order and caused mass chaos. That is a massive, sweeping accusation for an everyday action, right? But Dr. Chen, using his background in physics and network science, argues that this kind of linear A to B causality, it's mathematically impossible here. To figure out how both sides could look at the exact same event and see two completely different realities, we really need to dig into their underlying psychologies. Section 1. A clash of cultures. To really get what's going on, we kind of have to play neutral translator between two completely opposed frameworks. It's a perfect real-world example of Michel Gelfand's theory of cultural tightness. Think of the judicial system as this tight culture. It operates a lot like an overprotective immune system, right? It views social order as super fragile, so it needs strict zero-tolerance rules to suppress threats before an infection can even spread. But then you have Dr. Chen representing the loose culture of science. Science is more like this chaotic, wide-open brainstorming session. It prioritizes truth and open discussion above everything else. So what the scientific world just sees as healthy cognitive looseness, the judicial system sees as a literal threat to harmony. And this leads right into how these two sides literally think differently, perfectly matching Richard Nisbet's psychological frameworks. The law leans heavily on holistic thinking. They're looking at the overall atmosphere, the vibe, the intent. Like, they see a highly educated guy sharing negative info, and they holistically assume he's carrying some malicious intent to damage the social atmosphere. Dr. Chen, though, he's using analytic thinking. He is definitely not looking at vibes. He's looking at math. He breaks the problem down into nodes, probabilities, and mathematical models to figure out if his action actually caused a reaction. Section 2. The illusion of perfect order. So the law basically assumes that a social network should be this perfectly ordered place, and any disorder has to be a crime caused by a bad actor. But science completely dismantles that expectation. Dr. Chen brings up the CAP theorem from computer scientist Eric Brewer to explain the actual physical limits of the internet. It's kind of like that old fast, cheap, or good joke with contractors. You can only ever pick two. The CAP theorem proves that in any distributed system, you absolutely cannot guarantee consistency, availability, and partition tolerance all at the same time. One of them has to go. Let's actually apply this to the apps we use every day. Global social networks want you to be able to log in at 3 a.m. That's availability. And they need to survive localized server crashes. That's partition tolerance. Because they prioritize those two, they mathematically have to sacrifice strict consistency. Have you ever seen a post that your friend said was deleted, but it's still hanging around on your feed? That's the CAP theorem right there. The system sacrifices consistency so you can keep scrolling. This means information disparity and local disorder are literally hard-coded into the platform. Disorder is a structural feature, not a bug, and definitely not an anomaly caused by one guy forwarding a post. Section 3. Anatomy of social networks. Okay, so if disorder is totally natural, how does anything ever actually go viral and cause chaos? Well, modern social networks are what physicists call scale-free networks, which is a concept mapped out by Albert Laszlo Barabasi. This just means connections are incredibly unequal. They follow a power law distribution. Think of it as the 80-20 rule on absolute steroids, where less than 1% of users command 99% of the attention. The internet isn't a democracy, it's an oligarchy of connection. Just look at this massive power gap. You've got these massive hub nodes that completely dictate the network's fate, but the vast majority of users are just edge nodes with essentially zero structural power. Hub nodes are the giant news outlets, global pop stars, the algorithms themselves. Edge nodes, that's you, me, and Dr. Chen. The hubs control the flow of information. The edge nodes are just along for the ride. Less than 100, that was Dr. Chen's follower count. In the massive, sprawling architecture of a scale-free network, this places him firmly, unequivocally, as an edge node. In network physics terms, he's practically a microscopic speck of dust. Structurally speaking, a node with that few connections is physically incapable of triggering a system-wide collapse all on its own.
Section 4. The Mathematics of Influence.
So, what happens when a tiny edge node hits share? Can they actually break the internet? Let's look at the math, because this is where the legal theory of linear causality totally falls apart. Enter Reuven-Cohen's critical threshold formula. This proves that scale-free networks are incredibly robust against random edge node activity. Imagine a giant spiderweb. The hub nodes are the thick anchor threads holding it to the trees, and the edge nodes are the millions of tiny wispy threads in the middle. Cohen's math proves you could randomly cut nearly every single wispy edge thread, and the macro structure of the web wouldn't even flinch. So activating a single edge node has a statistical impact approaching absolute zero. Let's actually trace this out in real time. The math pretty much guarantees that the energy from a tiny edge node forwarding a post will just rapidly die out. Step 1, the forward happens. Step 2, it hits an incredibly small, localized network of mostly inactive users. Step 3, because the mathematical transmission rate among these isolated users is just so incredibly low, the branching process extinguishes the spread almost instantly. And step 4, the macro network doesn't even register a blip. Dr. Chen literally hit the nail on the head with this quote, "My forwarding is like breathing out carbon dioxide. You cannot sentence me to life in prison for global warming." It so perfectly highlights how linear legal causality just completely fractures when dealing with complex systems. You can't take a microscopic statistically insignificant variable, a single breath, and legally declare it the sole cause of global warming. It's scientifically illiterate.
Section 5. Law meets complex science.
All right, so what happens when we bring all this hard science back into the courtroom? We get this massive clash over the burden of proof. The law strictly demands a direct, unbroken link between a behavior and a result. But science proves that link physically doesn't exist for an edge node. Now, is it completely impossible for an edge node to start a fire? No. But to prove guilt, the prosecution would have to scientifically prove that the entire network was hovering in a super rare, hyper-fragile, supercritical state. Imagine a giant room filled floor to ceiling with invisible, highly flammable gas. For Dr. Chen to be guilty, they have to prove the gas was already there, and his post was the exact spark that blew it up. But without back-end server data from the platform, that legal argument has zero scientific foundation. What we're left with is this incredibly profound, almost tragic mismatch. It's an analog legal system trying to hammer a digital mathematical peg into a round hole. The legal system acts holistically to maintain cultural order, punishing what it thinks is a vibe or intent of disorder. Meanwhile, the scientist runs the numbers and proves that, mathematically, it was a complete non-event. And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer today. As our communication systems become infinitely more mathematically complex, decentralized, and entirely non-linear, how can our traditional linear legal systems ever hope to keep up? If the law doesn't speak the language of network physics, can it truly deliver justice in the digital age? Definitely something to think about the next time you hit that share button. Thanks for hanging out with me on this deep dive.